Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russ Sabella. I'm with the Florida School Counselor Association, and welcome to our webinar. This is Bullying and Child Safety, presented by Stacy Pendarvis, the Education and Research Director for the Monique Burr Foundation for Children. We are glad to have you with us today, Stacy. We have an hour, and I know you've got lots of information. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll get an email with the URL of the replay, including the handouts and the PowerPoints, as soon as it's available. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them in the questions box, which we will get to as soon as we can. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Stacy Pendarvis. Stacy?
Thank you, Russ, and thank you to the Florida School Counseling Association for having the Monique Burr Foundation for Children here today, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. I know you've probably had a long day at school already, and just appreciate you being here and trying to learn more about the topic of bullying and child safety and how to do better at your schools and better protect children. It's something that's near and dear to our hearts, and some of you may be familiar with our name, especially if you are an elementary counselor. With our Speak Up Be Safe program. Our Speak Up Be Safe program is a bullying and child abuse prevention program. We're approved in 51 out of 67 counties in Florida and implementing the program in those counties. And so we have spent the summer enhancing that program, and we're looking forward to rolling that out in October for Bullying Prevention Month. So we'll get started with the program, and Russ, we're glad to have Russ on the line with us. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dr. Russ Sabella and his work, and his website will tell you about that. And I look to him as an expert on technology safety. And so Russ, feel free to jump in and offer any advice and suggestions that I may be missing today as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so let me just start with some information. You know, I mean, bullying it's really kind of a huge topic nowadays, and there's research and reports coming out continually. I just read one about the newest research on internet dangers from peers and predators, and the survey results are about to be published in the International Journal of Social Media and Interactive Learning Environments. And it was interesting when I read that piece, and it showed me kind of got me interested in thinking about two things. The old tale that many of us grew up with about sticks and stones is now what I'm going to call clicks and phones. So it's interesting to think about how things have changed. How they're still somewhat the same, but they've changed over time. But the damage is real, and it can do a lot of damage. So that's one thing. The other thing that it kind of has taught us is apparently there's a journal for just about anything you might want to read or publish. I found it interesting that there is an International Journal of Social Media and Interactive Learning Environments. So, you know, I think that finding the research is out there, and hopefully what we can do today is tell you about some of the stuff that we have found and get you up to date on some of the bullying and child safety information. But a little bit about that study. It's researchers from Johnson and Wales University in Rhode Island. They surveyed more than 4,200 students using the Survey of Knowledge and Internet Risk and Behavior, and what they found is that, obviously we all know this, many children are bullied and few understand internet safety. More specifically, what they found is that 1 in 3 admit to being bullied at school, and parental involvement in monitoring internet activity is low, with only about 1/3 of middle school students and 17% of high school students reporting any parental monitoring of online activity. So it's the interesting point that came out of it is the biggest issue was they found they were unaware of the risks of inappropriate online behaviors, viewing them as trivial and believing that it wouldn't happen to them. They found if they did encounter the risk or online danger online, it often led them to attempt to cope with it on their own and not inform a parent or adult. So, you know, the feeling of the students was, it's not that dangerous and it won't happen to me. And of course we know that's directly related to brain development and the executive functioning developing later. So the feeling is that they can get away with it and they can continue to do the behaviors there's been numerous studies that have shown even after presenting information to teenagers about the dangers, they will still continue the behaviors because they have the feeling that they're invincible and it will not happen to them. So what we're going to cover today, and we don't have a lot of time, but we're going to try to cover and hopefully kind of stick to this agenda. We're going to look at the reality versus the perception of each participant when there is a bullying event. So how do we see bullying, or how do we look at bullying through the eyes of students, parents, teachers, and administrators? What I found in going around the state and doing our trainings for Speak Up, Be Safe, and training parents and teachers and administrators is that everyone has a different take on bullying. And then we're going to look at the new cyberbullying law and its impact on schools. We're going to talk about actions to keep students safe, and we'll finish with some questions and answers. So let's start with our kind of first agenda item, bullying through the eyes of students, parents, teachers, and administrators. And I want to talk about the definition and types of bullying, current trends and issues, and then the problem with the definition versus the perception, because there is a difference, and that's what we run into constantly. Don't want to read the entire definition to you because I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. If you are not familiar with it, we've included links in the PowerPoint notes, and we'll also make this available to you. And the other thing that I wanted to let you know as well, we'll talk about this as we progress today, you educating your staff and your parents and other things. So we will take this PowerPoint and actually create a PowerPoint that counselors can use in your schools to educate your staff and your parents, and we will make that available to you as well. It'll be a resource that if you would like, you can email us, and then we will pass that PowerPoint along to you to use. And Russ has some other great resources on his website as well. We'll talk about those. But the definition obviously is according to state statute, the Jeffrey Johnston Stand Up for All Students Act from 2008, and then there's an act that just passed that was effective July 1st. We'll talk about that as well. But some of the key things to remember, obviously, in the definition is that it's got to be a repeated act. It talks about systematically, and chronically. It can be physical or psychologically. But also it talks about it has to be severe or pervasive enough to create an intimidating or offensive educational environment, and it goes on and lists some other things that has to be involved for it to be bullying. So this is the definition that we have to look at when we're looking at does an event or does an incident or does an ongoing and repeated behavior being displayed meet the definition. The types that are included when we talk about the definition or the Jeffrey Johnston Stand Up for All Students Act, and then it's also embodied in the Model Department of Education policy, are teasing, social exclusion, threat, intimidation, stalking, physical violence, theft, sexual, religious, or harassment, public or racial or harassment, public or private humiliation, and then also destruction of property. So it covers quite a broad range of types of behaviors. Cyberbullying means through the use of bullying through the use of technology or any electronic communication, which includes but not limited to, and then you can see the whole list there. So you have those on your handout, and again, we'll make this whole PowerPoint available to you to use as well. So it can be any type of electronic transmission or any type of creation of a web page. That's another event that can be included. So you can also be someone who assumes the identity of another person or impersonates another person and authors posts and things like that. And again, continuing the definition, includes distribution by electronic means of a communication to more than one person or posting material on electronic medium. So we look at social media and other aspects, phones, internet, and that sort of thing. And sometimes you'll hear the term digital abuse. There's a lot of different terms. CDC uses electronic aggression. So there's varying terms that you might hear related to cyberbullying and digital abuse. Cyber stalking is also defined, and it means to engage in a course of conduct to communicate or cause to be communicated words, images, or language by or through the use of, and then it goes on to list the same types of behaviors, and it must cause substantial emotional distress to the person and serve no legitimate purpose. In my opinion, bullying in general serves no legitimate purpose, but I think that the point of it is that it's a larger, broader behavior. So looking at current issues and trends, and we'll come back to the definition, but I wanted to just address it in the broad sense of what does the law say. There's so many issues right now that kids are dealing with. When we did our enhancements over the summer for Speak Up, Be Safe, we went to a lot of subject matter experts in different fields and talked to them about different things. And this list is by no means exhaustive. It's really just the tip of the iceberg of things that we found that as far as on the bullying side, kids are having to deal with, students are having to deal with. But cyberbullying and cyberstalking are obviously two big issues. According to the Cyberbullying Research Center, there's two challenges in trying to address it, and that is that people feel cyberbullying is not this big, huge event or deal. It's not a big deal. Or no one wants to take accountability or responsibility for trying to fix the issue. So that's a problem. But when you see that kids continue to commit suicide, or what people are terming bully-cide, you might hear that term used, for those families and for those schools and communities affected, then it is. So I don't know if there's anyone on the line from Polk County. You have suffered a recent tragedy there, a 12-year-old girl, and I'm sure everyone has heard about that case. But I grew up in Polk County in Lakeland, and I actually went to Crystal Lake Middle School where this little girl was from. And so, you know, it doesn't just affect her family or that school. It affects the whole community, and it affects our whole state when we hear those kinds of stories that things were so bad for a little girl that she felt like her only resolution to that was to commit suicide. So, you know, I think we look at the numbers and we think, you know, of the numbers in situations sometimes, but I think the numbers are irrelevant, because if any child is feeling that hopeless, then to me that's an issue that we have to deal with and address. Again, I talked about digital abuse, and that's a broader term. But in digital abuse, from our perspective, we have to look at that from a sense of, so it's not only peers that we're having to deal with online that are abusing children. We have to look at predators too. Virtual reality sites are a huge issue online. And it's interesting because there are virtual reality sites, IMVU and WeWorld, and if you're not familiar with virtual reality sites, that might be something you want to spend some time studying. We're not going to spend a lot of time today going through these. I wanted to bring them up to give you some ideas of things that you might want to look into further. But my goal today is to really give you some strategies to use in the school on bullying and cyberbullying, so I want to get to that part of the presentation. But there's a lot of information out there on virtual reality sites and what kids are doing on virtual reality sites. But there's a lot of bullying that's taking place. I kind of did a little bit of personal research and went on WeWorld and created a profile. And the interesting thing to most of these sites, and the same with a lot of social media sites if you've never gone on them, is it asks you if you're over 13 years old. Some sites are you over 17 years old? And you can say no, and then it will tell you, like for WeWorld, for example, it says, are you over 13? And I said no, and then it said, you need your parents' permission. And then it says, do you have your parents' permission? So I said yes, and it let me right on. So again, the checks and balances for keeping kids out of some of these places where they shouldn't be, where it's not age appropriate, is not very stringent as far as the controls or the lack thereof of controls. So, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of bullying going on. There's a lot of sexual innuendo on new sites, and there's probably some very young kids on there. So virtual reality sites, they start pretty young. There's even some bullying that's taking place on Club Penguin and some of those sites. So school safety is another issue. We've heard a lot since the more recent shootings. And you know, I always go back to, because I focus I focus on prevention. So I go back to, we're a very reactive society, and after the most recent school shooting, we constantly talked about, or we constantly heard about, so we're going to arm you know, we're going to arm the officers in schools, or we're going to arm the principals, or heck, we can even arm the counselors maybe if you guys want to get, you know, get your concealed permit. But the reality is we don't talk about why these people are going into schools and shooting kids and teachers and staff, and I think that that is where we need to be focusing our attention. There's a very interesting article that I want to recommend to everybody, and we'll send you the site, but it's powerreporting.com//shoot.pdf. And it was a special report in the, I think it was the Chicago Times, but what it was is what they found was that after interviewing 41 school shooters and 37 incidents, the Secret Service found that 2/3 of those had been bullied, and the attacks were motivated by a will to seek revenge. So we have to, and even when they did a lot of those interviews, got a lot of feedback about, they gave clues, and they you know, had talked to people about the bullying, and it never stopped. And so not that that would prevent every school shooting or protect us from every incident of, you know, unsafe situations in schools, but it sure wouldn't hurt to focus on some of those early warning signs that we can see when school situations are showing us that they're not safe. But that's a very interesting article that I think every counselor, teacher, and administrator should read, and then help us focus and be more proactive and preventive in nature rather than reactive. Social media is huge, and I'm sure, Russ, you know a lot about this, but every time I turn around, I'm hearing about a new social media site, whether it's from my teenager who's sharing one with me, or I'm just learning about it. There are hundreds and hundreds of these sites, and kids are, you know, if parents infiltrate their social media sites, they just move on and create new ones. And so we have to kind of keep up and look at what these sites are. And there are some that you can log on, and you'll get a warning that there's you know, adult content on the site. But as soon as you click that, you know, you're of age or you have permission to be on it, you can get right on it. And when they talk about adult content, they're not kidding. There's some very, shall I say, graphic stuff out there. And what's interesting is we have found in some districts trying to get our program in, there's been some pushback because of talking about sexual abuse or talking about sexual exploitation. But it's interesting that we found Semantic did a study, or they actually, I think they continually do this. They monitor age groups and who Googles what words. And the fourth most frequently searched term for children 7 and under was porn in their most recent study of that. So can you imagine 7-year-olds and under, and they're Googling the word porn? Well, when that comes up, you can imagine what they're seeing. So, you know, in kids, very, very young kids, you're supposed to be 13 to go on Facebook, but we know that's not happening. So, so there's a lot of bullying that's taking place on social media, and a lot of other things that are taking place on social media. And I think that's a big issue of where we need to focus our efforts in prevention and that sort of thing. And then last but not least, I wanted to mention polyvictimization. It's a kind of big area of research and practice right now. And what they have found in doing these retrospective studies is that if children are bullied or if children are abused, there's a much more likeliness that they have been victimized in other ways. So there's a higher correlation of kids or people that have been bullied and sexually abused. In fact, I think that one of the studies showed if somebody had been bullied or sexually abused, they were 6 times more likely to have been the vice versa. So if they were sexually abused, they were 6 times more likely to have been bullied, and vice versa. So I think that is a huge issue for us to look at when we look at what types of programs we're implementing and what types of policies and practices we're implementing in our schools and where we're spending our time. We've got to look at these types of issues. So I just wanted to mention those things to you as far as keeping up with some of these current issues and trends and what we need to be looking at. So let's look at what the problem is between the definitions and perceptions of bullying. Every person involved in a bullying incident or the bullying event or cycle is going to see it differently. And I know this because like I said, when I've done trainings, everyone presents their side of the story, and they have a side to the story, but it's very different. So teachers will say, you know, well, we're doing everything we can, but students say that they're not seeing teachers do anything about when they're being bullied. Counselors will say to me, you know, we're doing everything we can, but we're not getting the support from teachers, or teachers aren't doing what they need to be doing. Obviously, parents think any instance of when their child comes home and says something happened at school is considered bullying. I've even had some student support staff say, some parents go as far as to say their kids are being bullied so they can change and get into better schools. And then, of course, you know, students, they have their own perspective, and administrators have their own perspective as well. Does an incident meet the definition, and what is it going to look like if they have a high incident or high rate of bullying reports? So you've heard the term perception is reality, but when you have this many different realities, how does everybody get on the same sheet of music and act accordingly? And are we acting in the best interest of the child, or are we acting in the best interest of the school? That's the problem, I think, with the different perceptions. Sometimes it doesn't allow for the best interest of the child to be met, and sometimes it doesn't allow for an immediate reaction. So we were thinking about, or talking about, you know, the policy, most district policies allow for 10 days. I think the actual state model policy allows for up to 15 days for the report and all the way through the intervention to take place through the investigation. But here's a problem with that. If a parent reports something or a student reports something and a district has 10 days to do the investigation, in 10 days a child could be dead if the incident is severe enough or it's been going on long enough. So to me, that's not necessarily reacting in the best interest of a child, but to an administrator, they're following policy. So I think we have to look at the model policies, and what the state tells us that we should do may not necessarily be in the best interest of a child, or it's not necessarily the only things that we can do as a school. So we have to consider that when we talk about what can we do to keep children safe. I want to look at and do a couple polls with you, and from what I understand, Russ, I haven't done these, so we're going to try, and hopefully these will work. I want to look at, would these situations be considered bullying, and then we'll go through them and talk about how might each person see them differently. So I'll give you a few minutes to read this online, to read your slide. Hopefully everybody can see that okay, and then we'll put up the first poll.
Okay, I think you need to go to the next slide for the first scenario, right? There it is.
Are we not?
There it is. Yep.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. All right.
Okay.
Russ, are you ready to put the poll up for him?
We are. Let's do it. I'm going to launch the first poll. So go ahead and select if you believe it's true or false. Give you a few seconds before we close the poll. Okay, is that about okay? Actually, I've got 55% voting, 63%. Let's keep going. Yep, almost there. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll now.
Okay.
And it looks like 88% said false and 12% said true.
Okay. So the question is the mother correct? Is Alexander's behavior bullying, true or false? The correct answer here is actually false. So most of you actually got that right. Pretty good. And we're looking at according to the definition. So he made some comments, and she went home to her mother and talked to her mother about it, and the mother called and the school, and so said she was outraged about her daughter being bullied and wants Alexander punished. The reason that would not meet the definition is because it hasn't been repeated. There's not a repeated behavior there. This seems like a one-time event. Now, we didn't hear of any additional behaviors, so without any further information or knowing about any repeated behaviors, then that would be false. That would not be considered bullying. We're going to talk in the next section about what could you do in situations like this, kind of behaviors that we see that don't meet the definition of bullying, but you would want to intervene. So let's look at the next scenario. Take a few minutes to read this, and then we'll do the next poll.
Yeah, go ahead and advance to the next slide.
Okay, I did, hopefully. Can you see it? I see it.
Now we're still on Kendra and Alexander. Oh, there we go.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, should we launch the poll?
Go? Yep, absolutely.
All right, here we go. The poll is now open. You should see it on your screen.
All right, go ahead and vote.
About 5 more seconds. Okay, let's close the vote, and I'll share the results. You can see it's 98% true and 3% false, with 78% of the people voting.
Very good. So you got that one good. You got that one right. Very good. Remember, our definition of cyberbullying includes the creation of a web page or weblog in which the creator assumes the identity or author's content or messages, and they're derogatory. It's repeated, and there's also some threats of physical harm there. So very good on that one. And then we're going to move on to our last one. And let me know, Russ, if you see that. I've clicked on the next one, but it seems like it's taken a little bit to advance.
Yeah, not there yet.
Okay.
Try it again. There it is. Okay. So I've got Cheryl, Candace, and Alicia.
There you go.
All right, we'll go ahead and open up the poll. And here we go. Go ahead and vote. About 5 more seconds.
Okay.
And we'll go ahead and close. And this one is really a landslide.
I thought I'd try to make one a little easy for you, but y'all got the last one. It was pretty easy too. So what we get, 100?
100% true.
Very
Yeah.
good. Very good. That's right. So, you know, the interesting thing is sometimes they're clear-cut cases, and other times I get questions about things like, well, there's a boy or there's a child that, you know, he bullies, but he doesn't bully the same child over and over. He goes from this child to this child to this child, so it's not repeated against the same victim. So, you know, the principal says that doesn't meet the definition, so we can't do anything about it. And so there's all kinds of situations that come up in schools, and I think what we have to get past is if it doesn't meet the definition, even in the policies set forth by the Department of Education, you can still make reports, but even barring that, there are still lots of things that schools can do to be preventive and proactive, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. So let's move on and look at let's move on and look at the next section of our agenda, because I think we're a little over on time what I wanted to spend on that first section. So I want to talk about the new cyberbullying legislation and its impact on schools. And this past, Governor Scott signed it into law earlier this year, and it was effective July 1st, so it is impacting schools now. And on the Florida Department of Education website, there's actually already an updated model policy for districts to follow regarding bullying. And the requirements for the legislation really are two changes, two things that we need to be aware of. And it requires intervention by schools, or it allows intervention by schools in off-campus cyberbullying cases, and also talks about schools need to provide cyberbullying prevention education. So let's talk about those one at a time. And we'll talk first about intervention by schools in off-campus cases of cyberbullying. So cyberbullying was always a part of the Jeffrey Johnston Act, but it mentioned computers as those being on campus, and I think there was times there was confusion about whether schools could intervene, couldn't intervene. Some schools did, some schools didn't. Quite frequently, I think it was a reason for schools not to get involved. There were many parents who went to the schools and said, this is happening, but the schools said, according to the law, we can't get involved because the incident took place off campus. So the law now reflects that even if the incident takes place by a phone, a computer, anything off school grounds, the school can intervene if the learning of that child or the school operation is impeded in any way. And so I think that allows a lot of intervention to take place where students are being cyberbullied or harassed, and previously there was no intervention taking place. And that's, I think, important for a lot of students that are being cyberbullied to hopefully get some intervention before it ends up in a dire situation. It also expands the definition of cyberbullying, and that is what you saw earlier that I had to divide into 3 slides because it's now so long. There's a question I think that comes up: do schools have to monitor social media or monitor what students are putting out there in order to meet this requirement? And the answer to that is no. You are not required, schools are not required to go out and monitor what students are doing. It's only if a situation is brought to the attention of a school, or it's impeding that child's learning ability or the operation of a school, or it's brought to an event or something like that. And just on that note, it's always an issue that's brought up and constantly asked, should parents monitor children's social media? And there's kind of 2 schools of thought, and I've heard it presented both ways about should parents do that. And, you know, I think that we have to remember that what we've done is we lock our doors and we teach kids don't let strangers in, and we teach kids about stranger danger, and we teach kids about safety in other areas. And then we've given kids this technology that kind of opens the world to them, and we're not educating them appropriately on the dangers of it, and we're not monitoring them appropriately. And I think sometimes it's because parents really don't know how to do that. And Russ's website has some fantastic resources to help us do that. And at the end of the PowerPoint, you'll see I've got links to quite a few resources to help us do that, to educate parents. But I think that we're really missing an opportunity to partner with students and parents to help them learn how to do this. And it's not so much, in my opinion, spying as it is educating students about how to be safe with this new technology. So I think the answer to that is we're not really spying or monitoring, but we're educating. The other piece to the legislation is that it requires instruction on recognizing, responding, and preventing bullying. But I think the interesting thing is it includes students, parents, teachers, administrators, counseling staff, and school volunteers. So it's requiring schools to do this, and it's requiring it in a very broad way, which to me is fantastic, because that's kind of what I love to do, is to educate people on protecting kids and keeping kids safe. And so, you know, our program Speak Up, Be Safe, which I'll tell you about towards the end, how you can use that or other programs to your benefit and not have to reinvent the wheel. But it includes training with the curriculum and other resources to help you do that. But there are programs out there to help you do this. So, but that is something that is now required. And then moving on to kind of our last agenda item before we get to questions and answers, but one that I really want to focus the most time on is actions to keep students safe. And the two things I want to talk about are engaging all parties with a system of action, which we'll talk about, and then school-based prevention and what the research says about school-based prevention and why it's important. So what is a system of action? It's a plan of action for including all parties or stakeholders. I'm a social worker by education, and you know, the mental health field for years has used what we call a system of care. I'm sure you're familiar with that terminology. And it's how do you embrace all stakeholders in caring for a client using a systems approach to ensure that they're getting the best possible treatment, intervention, or care. So for bullying prevention, intervention, and treatment, I am proposing that as a school you have a plan of action, or what you can call a system of action, and that way you're involving everyone impacted, the entire school, and those not yet impacted, because the reality is at some point pretty much everyone is going to be impacted. You know, I didn't spend a lot of time giving you statistics on bullying. They're out there if you want them. I figured we would be more proactive and focus on strategies to overcome it, but between 50 and 77% of students report being bullied. There are about 13 million each year, and 160,000 students stay home each day. So the reality is, even if they haven't been impacted, at some point they will. They'll see bullying or cyberbullying, or there'll be a party involved somehow. So the plan of action or system of action really does engage all parties, and I think that that is what, to me, is important to remember when we try to come up with strategies to overcome bullying. So using kind of a social ecological model to develop a system of action in your schools, and you look at it in the sense of what, for our school, what makes sense. We have to look at actions on the individual, interpersonal, and organizational level. And of course, community and societal things will impact your school as well. But you can control the individual, interpersonal, and organizational actions that your school does. And with individual, you want to look at how can each individual be taught to recognize, respond, and prevent bullying behaviors. So you want to, of course, look at all the parties that we talked about before: students, parents, administrators, staff, and teachers. And I want to talk about these terms for a minute: pre-actions, pro-actions, and reactions. So pre-actions are things that you do across the board all the time. They're preventive in nature. Without ever seeing any bullying behaviors, you would be doing these and implementing these. And we'll talk about what these are specifically in a few minutes. I'm going to show you a bullying continuum. And then pro-actions are things that you want to do to be proactive When you see normal conflict, normal social conflict, or pre-bullying behaviors, you would use the pro-actions and be very proactive to try to stop it from escalating. And then reactions are things that you would do to react appropriately and timely anytime you see bullying. So at the individual level, you would use those, and at the interpersonal level, you would look at how can relationships be strengthened between all involved parties, students, parents, teachers, staff, and administrators. At the organizational level, you would look at how can policies, procedures, and behaviors be developed to ensure all parties will act according to the system of action. So we can develop this system of action for our school looking at who's involved, how can we get everyone involved, and how do we look at each individual component of a system of action and get everybody involved. And we'll talk more about this in just a minute when we look at the bullying continuum. So you must use really a whole continuum to be effective. You can't just wait for bullying behaviors and then react. Again, I think that's what we sometimes try to do. Our society is very reactive in nature, and it's not effective. So if you're looking at this continuum of behavior and you're using pre-actions, pro-actions, and reactions, and everyone is on board with the system of action, you'll have a much more likelihood of having a community in your school that is less likely to have bullying and to be more engaged and better socially. So let's look at each component. If you look at this continuum, you have from healthy all the way up to conflictual and up to bullying behaviors. So we have healthy relationships in a school. Sometimes you see normal peer conflict. I think sometimes bullying has become such a hot topic that we've gotten to the point where anytime there's conflict, anytime there's social conflict, sometimes people are engaged to the point where oh my gosh, there's bullying going on, and it's not necessarily bullying. So with isolation being a type of bullying, sometimes we forget that is really where we learn about our social relationships and friendships. And so if someone is kind of left out or picked last for a game, or that is not necessarily bullying behavior, that's normal peer relationships and conflict, and we have to accept that that's where kids learn a lot of these behaviors. And so sometimes that does escalate, and it becomes typical for a child to be excluded and left out. And if that happens, it might become pre-bullying behavior or escalate into bullying, where it does become repeated and more detrimental psychologically to a child. So you can see how it escalates along this continuum of behavior. So at each level of the continuum, there are actions that we can take, pre-actions, pro-actions, and reactions. So let's look at each one. So in healthy relationships, there's always things that we can be doing. You want to foster those healthy relationships. You would use your pre-actions, teach empathy, use character development programs and positive reinforcement. Use social emotional learning concepts or programs in your school. Social emotional learning such as self-awareness and management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness and skills. Those are great skills to teach even when they're just healthy relationships that you're seeing on the playground or in the classroom. Reinforce those and talk about with students why those are good and what they're doing that's positive and how that is helpful. And let them model, kids that are engaged in those healthy relationships, let them model that for other students. So there's always things that we can be doing along that continuum to be reinforcing those behaviors. For normal peer conflict or social conflict, we have to remember sometimes we have to allow that to occur, but we need to be supportive, again, with the social emotional learning, and use those as teaching opportunities. So how do we choose friends? How do we be a good friend? How do we be supportive? If somebody is not getting along with another student, how do we manage that? How do we teach the students to manage that without being mean? How do we teach students empathy and courage and other traits such as those? If it does escalate into pre-bullying behaviors, we have to then remember that we have to be proactive, and so use those as teaching opportunities as well. Use a program or learn about bystander interventions. Don't help students learn that there are things that they can do to not feed into behaviors that would cause them to escalate into bullying. Don't spread rumors, don't repeat gossip. How to talk to a safe adult, how to identify and talk to a safe adult. Don't support bullies. How to be a friend to someone who might be a target of bullying or pre-bullying behavior. And then if it does escalate into bullying, obviously the model policy is sufficient, but not always enough. Sometimes we have to go above and beyond that, and so we can do better if we desire to do better than that. We can look at other district policies and see there are some policies that go above and beyond what the model policy is. Focus on children. As I said before, policies should always focus on the children and not the school. Teach kids how to tell adults, teach students bystanders, how to be upstanders rather than bystanders. And so all along this continuum there are things you can do. And as I said, we have this PowerPoint and we'll develop it further for you if